No mai haere mai, ko Shannon Dowsing toko ingoa. Welcome to the Exchange Cafe. At the Exchange Cafe, we come together to share conversations and resources about climate solutions. We're fortunate to have Meka Whaitiri in the studio with us today, the Te Pāti Māori Candidate for Ikaroa Rāwhiti electorate in the upcoming 2023 general election. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Shannon. Lovely to be here at Exchange Cafe.
It is wonderful to have you in, and off the back of a fantastic debate last night on whakaata Māori.
One of many. It's that silly season called the general election that comes around every 3 years. But yeah, lovely to be in the studio and with you.
Thank you for coming in. Do you want to tell us all a little bit about yourself, your connections to the region?
Sure. So born here in Gisborne. It was called Cook Hospital, so that probably shows you how old I am. My father is rongo whakaata. Our family home is right opposite the Māori battalion in Manatuki, which is where I stay when I'm here in Gisborne. My mum also has whakapapa to this area, so I've got rongo whakaata, Ngāi Manuhiri, Te Atanga Mahaki, and I've also got Ngāti Porou whakapapa. So I cover all four iwi into Tairāwhiti. Like I said, my heart and soul is Manatuki. Went to Manatuki Primary School, and then my dad was a meat inspector here at Kaiti, and then he got a job transferred to Whakatū, the largest meat work in the Southern Hemisphere, 2,500 people. We've all worked in the freezing works, we being my mother, my siblings, so I've got a sister and 3 brothers, so we've all worked in the freezing works. When we were living here, my mum was a Rousey. She worked with Uncle Stan Pardo in his sheds. When we were young enough, as growing up in Manatuki, we would work with my Uncle Pong Wiley. He was a ganger here, and he worked for a fellow called Rob Cooper, and then Dollar Tahoe. So we've done all the sheds up the coast. And I worked in the sheds when I was 7, and it wasn't plain. Those were the days where you got up, Shannon, at 5 in the morning, and you worked till 5. They were 9.5-hour days, and there were no weekends because you worked till you cut the sheds out. So that's my upbringing in Tairāwhiti, hard-working, manual labourers, down-to-earth village, brought up on a marae.
Kia ora, that's awesome. So today we're focusing on the environment and climate change, and your party's policies and how they'll affect Te Tairāwhiti. As you know, under the Paris Agreement, New Zealand has signed up to very ambitious reduction targets. But so far, we're looking unlikely to reach these. The science is telling us that we've got 6 years left to at least half our emissions if we don't want to be caught in a runaway climate collapse. There's a high level of concern among New Zealanders, particularly rangatahi, asking for more urgent and effective action. What's your party's commitment to climate action? And what plans do you have to halve our emissions in the next 6 years?
Well, let me start first and foremost, Shannon. Papa Tuanuku's not well. Papa Tuanuku's not well. Hasn't been well for a long time. Not of their own making, by men's making. So we believe, Te Pāti Māori, that the Māori people have to be at the forefront of looking after Papa Tuanuku. So that's the whenua, our waterways, our sea. So we believe in Indigenous models and reclaiming our responsibility as kaitiakis. People use terms, but when you see who's champion climate solutions, it's not our people. And here on the coast particularly, because we've seen it up and down State Highway 35, we see it on a regular basis, the impact of climate change. But the first First Peoples that will get hit, and they are getting hit, are our coastal people. And for Te Tairāwhiti, that's Māori. And so our party wants to actually resource locally led solutions, and in this case, Māori led solutions, because I think we are the kaitiakis, but we've never been resourced to look after it. We need to make all our coastlines resilient. And I want to acknowledge the work that I know our uawa, tolaga whānau, are doing around the environmental, what we're doing at the schools, but they are not resourced again to do what they need to do to make those communities and apply adaptation. So we are going to set up a $1 billion, what's called a clean energy fund. We want to put 100 million towards what's called a Māori Taiao relief fund. But your question around emissions, we're going to bring in agricultural emissions into the ETS. If you're not going to reduce your runoffs, then you're going to have to pay for them. So that's Te Pāti Māori's, a few sentences about being committed. Localise solutions, bring the agriculture emissions into ETS and set up funds.
Excellent. Well, you've touched on this already, which is that Tairāwhiti is vulnerable and being severely impacted by climate change. Our lifelines, including our roads, our waters, our power, communication, all cut off in a single event. What will your party do to support Tairāwhiti as a region to prepare for the impacts of climate change?
So I mentioned supporting local solution. Māori need to lead. Māori need to be at the forefront. Local communities, hapus, who know their areas more than anybody. In fact, in Cyclone Gabriel, when I finally got to get into Tokomaru Bay, we had a kaumātua who actually made the comment. He said, Meka, they always send all these scientists in. They come to the mouth of our river and they start digging there. And we're all going, you've got all the degrees in the world, you're at the wrong place. You need to go at the beginning of the waterways. So he was saying, he was demonstrating local Indigenous knowledge versus Western knowledge. And that was my point around local solutions. So obviously there's a lot to do on the coast, but one thing I think we haven't explored is the Blue Highway. So we're very reliant on State Highway 35. I'd be the last person to say let's not use it because that is the lifeline. I'm open, and Te Pāti Māori are open to the use of the waterways to transport our people up and down the coast. You can see as you travel up there, whether it's Tokomaru Bay Wharf, Tolaga Bay Wharf, we had wharfs, and that was to get product off the coast when it was economically pumping back in the day. So we have a footprint already in there. I'd like to see sea gliders. I've been to see Napier Air. They are the only company that's contracted to bring a prototype of a sea glider, which is fully electric. They've presented it to the government of the day, to several ministers. They're going to, an example of a small company just backing themselves to bring transportation to this country that's fully electric, low emissions, obviously, infrastructural footprint very, very low. You just need a wharf and a charger, and the costs are so affordable in terms of air, which has got fossil fuel and all that sort of stuff. So some really good initiatives that Te Pāti Māori will be supporting to get us out of some of the real dangers that we're facing up the coast.
Awesome. So the ministerial inquiry into land use laid out a roadmap of recommendations to address the immediate and long-term risks facing the region. Will you incorporate the recommendations from Outrage to Optimism report? And what actions would you look to fast track?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously slash is what we physically see when we have massive flooding up the coast, and it clogs up all the waterways, all the rivers and on the beaches. So slash is absolutely at the heart of a lot of what the report has recommended. The problem that we have though is our biggest employer on the coast. And I'm not saying that we keep in forests, it just means that when you transition out, our options to transition from forestry into more sustainable land use is going to take some time and it's going to take some investment. Now, that's the Crown's responsibility, because if we go back to Bowler, it was the Crown that convinced all our sheep and beef farmers up there to stop doing that and plant trees. So I'm really conscious of outside people saying this is the solution for forestry up the coast when they don't know the coast. I've been saying that we need to leave the decisions around the transition and what we transition to the actual landowners. And there's a lot of Māori forest owners up the coast, as well as others. But I totally support the report that Hekia led. In terms of what we would fast track, I think the transition, we would totally fast track transition. And like I said, our Tairāwhiti fund, our clean energy fund will go a long way to actually fast tracking that.
Okay. So, well, with the wide-ranging impacts on our community, it's clear that we need that transition towards a sustainable economic future. I guess discussing that just transition a little further, How do you see that you'd enable those landowners to proceed with change as you suggest?
Yeah, so, well, the landowners need to be around the table. They need to be often, from my observation, particularly those in the farming sector, our Māori farming are very selective on whose table they join. They're often silent in the background. So there are those that are left farming, and then you have the forest owners. Ngāti Porou are a big farming owner up the coast, and they've got some very, very talented leaders there. So I've got no doubts Ngāti Porou will have a solution around how soon, whenever, and who would advocate for the best possible solution for them. But it's the smaller operators I worry about, and when I talk about smaller operators, I'm talking about Māori farms, and there are still a few up the coast. But I'm also seeing this transition too into, manuka honey and other sort of sustainable uses further up, particularly around Te Araroa. So I'm not a fan of somebody coming into the region and telling people. I'm a fan of the local landowners, and how you do that is they have to have a trusted voice to encourage them to be at the table when they're ready to be at the table, so they can be part of the transition that they may want to see going forward.
Businesses are under increasing pressure to reduce their carbon footprint, their impact on the environment, and how will your party support businesses to decarbonise?
Yeah, so obviously we want our businesses to be thriving, and for Māori businesses, when I've looked at Māori businesses, they're very, very conscious around the environment and the impacts. And this is why Te Pāti Māori wants to back our Māori economy. If you look at our larger corporations in terms of baselines, you see that they have multiple baselines. It's not just about profit, it is about people, and it is about the tai ao. So in terms of how we would help businesses, we would just back Māori businesses because they understand that they cannot operate and they cannot pollute. And perhaps that's why some of our traditional agricultural farms don't drive big profits, because they want to make sure that they're both looking after the whenua as well as, getting an income, but they're capital strapped. So what I would say in terms of businesses is support Māori businesses who will show the way as to what a sustainable business looks like.
We know that localised community-based energy projects are effective at cutting emissions and increase resilience in regions. Cyclone Gabriel demonstrated the urgent need for these local systems, and successful trials in our remote communities have taken place. How would your party remove the regulatory barriers and increase R&D into community energy products?
Well, some would argue that our regulatory framework here in Te Tairāwhiti isn't strong enough. Councils ultimately are charged with implementing regulations around the RMA, for example. I've had stories where being a unitary authority here in Te Tairāwhiti, GDC, limited resource, trying to make sure that when we are felling trees, that we're not leaving the amount of slash we see, for example. But obviously working with your regulator, which is GDC, to make sure that their capacity, to make sure that the regulations we currently have is fit for purpose, and it's encouraging people to decarbonise as opposed to, continue polluting. So we would work with, like I said, our priority as Te Pāti Māori is to work with our communities to understand and unlock sometimes the complexities that hold us back. But I've got no doubt that when you talk about sustainable practices that can lead to economic development, Māori have those answers, and some of the operators are. Again, they just lack the resources.
Power companies are making record profits, and while households are still struggling with soaring power prices, it was recently reported that the 4 biggest power companies had a combined earning of $2.7 billion last year. What will your party do to accelerate the adoption of cleaner energy options such as wind and solar, and Will this benefit New Zealand households?
Yeah, absolutely criminal. So we in our taxation policy, we are lifting the company taxes from 28 to 33 because we believe that we've got an unfair tax. And that's a small way to go after our power companies. But of course, I'm a big believer, and Te Pāti Māori's a big believer in Māori mana motuhake, your sovereignty over yourself. And so for the coast, we get a lot of sunshine, although, in January and February, we could say that we had more rain. But we're big believers in alternative energy sources. That's why we've set up the $1 billion Clean Energy Fund. That will go a long way to creating solar farms, wind, alternative energy generating systems, because obviously we've got a lot of sunshine on the coast. So solar farms is something, that a landowner could apply to the fund, and we could have one set up. They're not new initiatives. Wind farms, don't think we could get it on Hikurangi, but some of the other maunga up there could be ideal, but we should totally be looking at alternative energy generating systems, and Te Pāti Māori's $1 billion fund will go a long way to supporting those things to happen.
Great. We've committed to the Global Methane Pledge, needing to cut 50% of New Zealand's greenhouse emissions by 2030. What will your party do to support farmers to reduce their agricultural emissions? Yeah,
so we've got a what's called an ahu whenua farming fund. So it's an acknowledgement that Māori farmers generally are capital strapped. But we also know that they are also very good kaitiakis of their whenua. So like I said earlier, bringing in agricultural emissions into the ETS, that's our stance. But we also know for a lot of Māori, we need to transition them and perhaps invest in systems that are going to get them to both bigger productivity without creating more, more waste and more damage on their farms. So absolutely support the ETS. In fact, talking to some of our Māori forest owners up the coast, their advice to me is don't tamper with the ETS. The ETS is fine, and so again, being a ear to the ground and what works for Tairāwhiti is what they're saying, but definitely we need to bring those agricultural emissions in.
So we've, in this region, we're probably an example for all of New Zealand of the damage that planting monoculture pine, whether it's for forestry or carbon farming, could cause. It's resulted in unprecedented damage to our lands, waterways, and our biodiversity here. How will you address the current ETS settings that financially incentivise the planting of monoculture pine over natives?
So this gets back to the point I made earlier around transition. And so obviously up the coast, in terms of what land is left in whenua Māori hands, is the worst land classifications possible, meaning you can't do anything other than plant trees on it. So we're talking about land classifications 5, 6, 7, 8. So they're very hilly. And so, trees is what's got to go into it. But you also want an economic return for them, which is why we've got the monocultural pines. But the owners themselves realise that they need to move into more permanent forestry. So transition time to get the pine growers and the owners into more permanent forest. That's one thing that Te Pāti Māori will support. But we also want to see our native forests that are already up there untouched and how we can derive carbon credits from them. Because in 1991 is when they drew the line. Everything on this side could get it, everything on that side didn't, which was a lot of existing native forest on whenua Māori. I think that's fundamentally unfair. And I have raised that consistently since being in Parliament. So we could get some economic return while maintaining our native forests while we transition from monocultural pines into more permanent forests.
Great. We're in a biodiversity crisis, and a lot of our tonga species are at risk, and it's proving important as the need to reduce emissions comes to the fore. Will you support the development of a biodiversity credit system for New Zealand, as that was in the Outrage to Optimism report as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. So long as the biodiversity credit system is based on mātauranga Māori, and that Māori can see that they're going to derive benefit out of it, because it needs to be motivated by the fact that up the coast particularly, we've got whenua Māori who should derive benefit from this. And so if it's inclusive, then totally we will support that.
Great. Our waterways have become contaminated with excess nitrates, silt, runoff from farms and slash from forestry. They're no longer safe places for us to enjoy, collect kai or fresh water. What will your government do to restore the health and mauri of our waterways?
Yeah, so the mana te wai is the kaupapa that came from the iwi Leaders Forum and negotiation with Council. We completely support that. But we have to underscore, first and foremost, Māori's proprietary and kaitiaki rights to waterways. Because under successive governments, they say no one owns the water, then everyone owns the water. So we need to first establish Māori's intrinsic relationship to wai in this country. And that's both proprietary and kaitiaki. So we have to do that, re-educating our own people and everybody else, because with that, re-establishing that connection comes the ability to lead on water cleaners. Of course, no one wants paru rivers, but it's not Māori that have paru the rivers. And therefore, it's a Māori-led solution that will help tidy up our waterways. And, that's where Te Pāti Māori starting point is fresh water. We all want that. It is our kāinga, our mahi kāinga, and we need to support those local whānau and hapu who have for years been the kaitiakis. But at the moment, we have to establish those relationships, Shannon.
Kia ora. For today, just any last points? We'd love to know if there's anything else about your party's commitment to protecting, enhancing the environment and climate change.
Yeah, I just think sometimes when we are in crisis, like we are seeing, a cost of living crisis, when we're seeing our own people homeless, houseless, incarcerated, when we're seeing Papatūānuku being devastated as she currently is, and our waterways being paru'd, we tend to always look overseas, Shannon, for solutions. And yet, before this country was visited by Crown and early settlers, it was a different landscape and a different systems of managing ourselves and looking after ourselves. That's what was said in Article 2 of Te Waitangi, is gave us the absolute sovereignty to look after ourselves and our taonga. And all we're saying as Te Pāti Māori is we're now calling on government to honour Article 2 and for Māori, mātauranga Māori and solutions that come to the fore. So that point around in times of crisis, which this country is, we don't need to look overseas. We've got the solutions here, and Māori should be at the forefront and leading us out of the crisis, not created by ourselves, but we will be prepared to step up. We do it when there's flooding, when all our doors of marae's open. We did it during COVID when all our hauoras were vaccinating everybody. So this is prime example where Māori who lead for everybody. When others lead, we're often forgotten. Those times have to change.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Shannon.
So, ngā mihi nui, thank you for coming in. It's been a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed your perspective on things. Your knowledge and insights are fantastic, and thank you for standing in our electorate, because I know it's not a often thanked
Thank you,
task. And I wish you all the best with your campaign, obviously.
Tēnā koe.
Follow and contribute to the Exchange Cafe at exchangecafe.co.nz, because together we have the solutions. Mā te wā.